I am Cleopatra, the living Isis, and when the shadows of betrayal threatened to swallow Egypt whole, I claimed the burning light of Ra himself. Listen closely, for I shall tell you how I turned the sun's own fire into a weapon of absolute power, a strength that no man, no king, and no god dared to defy. I sit here, amidst the cool marble of my private chambers in Alexandria, the Mediterranean breeze carrying the scent of salt and blooming jasmine through the colonnades. My name is Cleopatra VII Philopator, the Queen of Kings, but tonight I am simply a woman sharing the weight of a crown forged in gold and tempered by fire. My life has been a symphony of calculated risks and deep, emerald-eyed devotions. I have always seen myself as the shield of Egypt, a woman of sharp intellect and iron will, yet one whose heart beats with a fierce, protective love for my people and those I hold dear. People speak of my beauty as if it were my only weapon, but they forget that a blade is most dangerous when it is wrapped in silk and adorned with jewels. You must understand the world I rule. It is a land where the Nile flows like liquid silver under the moon, and where the temples are stacked high with the tributes of 1,000 nations. My palace is a testament to the wealth of the Ptolemies. The floors are inlaid with ivory and ebony, and the walls shimmer with gold leaf that reflects the flickering torchlight. I am surrounded by opulence that would make the richest Roman senators weep with envy. Yet even all the gold in my treasury cannot buy a moment's peace when the sun itself begins to fail. A darkness has begun to creep across the two lands, a shadow that does not belong to the night. It is a cold, suffocating presence that withers the grain and turns the hearts of men to stone. My priests whisper of ancient curses, but I sense something far more tangible, a conspiracy of flesh and blood using the forbidden arts of the great shadow to unseat me. In this story, you will walk beside me through the corridors of power and the dusty, golden streets of the city. You will meet General Marcellus, a Roman whose strength is matched only by the gentleness of his touch when we are alone, and Nefert, my high priestess, a woman whose loyalty I trusted as much as my own breath. But in the shadows lurks a threat I did not foresee, a betrayal from within the very circle of those I have showered with gold and affection. The macro challenge is one that threatens the very existence of Egypt. The sun is dying, and with it the soul of my kingdom. I have been told that only the solar power of Ra, the primordial fire of creation, can push back this encroaching void. But the price of such power is a burden no mortal was ever meant to carry. I found myself standing at the precipice of a war not fought with khopesh and shield, but with the very essence of light. As I prepared to undergo a ritual that would either crown me with the sun or consume me in its flames, I realized that the greatest danger wasn't the darkness outside, it was the whisper of treason in the ear of the man I loved. How does a queen protect her throne when her heart is the very thing being used to destroy it? How do I wield the power of a god without losing the woman I have fought so hard to remain? Stay with me, for the path to the sun is paved with gold, stained with blood, and hidden behind a veil of secrets that only I can uncover. The sun hung in the sky like a pale, diseased eye, casting a sickly gray light over the marble plazas of Alexandria. I stood upon my balcony, the limestone beneath my feet still holding the faint, dying heat of a day that felt more like twilight. My fingers, adorned with rings of heavy gold and teardrop emeralds that matched the green of the great sea, gripped the balustrade. Usually, the city below me is a riot of color, the vibrant blue of the harbor, the terracotta roofs, the white flash of the Pharos lighthouse. But today a thin, unnatural mist purled through the streets, smelling not of the sea, but of dry, ancient dust and something cold, something that didn't belong to the living world. I felt a presence behind me before I heard the rhythmic clink of Roman plate armor. I did not need to turn to know it was Marcellus. He moved with a calculated grace of a predator, yet his footsteps always softened when he approached me. When I finally turned, the sight of him was, as always, a momentary reprieve from my anxieties. Marcellus is a man built of iron and sun-bronzed skin. He stood a head taller than most, his shoulders scarred from the campaigns in Gaul and the East. He wore a cuirass of polished bronze that caught the dying light, and a crimson cloak that draped over his frame like a spill of wine. His face was a map of his life. A jagged scar ran along his jawline, a souvenir from a Thracian blade, but his eyes were a startling, gentle blue, like the sky on a clear spring morning. He is a man of few words, possessed of a quiet, unshakable integrity that is rare in a world of silver tongues. I love him not just for his strength, but for the way he looks at me, not as a queen to be conquered, but as a soul to be protected. "The men are restless, Cleopatra," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the air. "They say the gods have abandoned the Nile. They say the sun is being eaten by a serpent we cannot see." I reached out, my hand resting briefly on his forearm, the heat of his skin a contrast to the chill in the air. "The people look for monsters when they cannot explain their own fear, Marcellus," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I fear this serpent has many heads, and some of them dine at my own table." We were joined then by Nefert, the high priestess of Isis and my closest confidant. She emerged from the shadows of the colonnade like a ghost made of linen and incense. Nefert is a woman of timeless age. Her skin is the color of dark honey, stretched tight over high, elegant cheekbones. Her head is ritually shaven, covered today by a heavy wig of braided black wool intertwined with threads of pure gold. Her eyes, elongated by thick strokes of galena and malachite, held a depth of sorrow that chilled me. She wore a gown of the finest transparent calasiris, pleated so delicately it looked like water frozen in time, held at the waist by a girdle of lapis lazuli. Nefert is the keeper of secrets, a woman whose intelligence is as sharp as a sacrificial knife, yet her heart is a well of compassion for the suffering of the poor in the shadows of the temples. "The oracle is silent, my queen," Nefert whispered, her hands tucked into her sleeves. "The great shadow is thickening. The sacred fires in the temple of Ra refused to ignite this morning. The priests are terrified, and the treasury is being drained by those who claim they can buy the gods' favor with gold." As she spoke, I looked past her toward the great bronze doors of the inner sanctum, where my chief adviser, Potinus, stood watching us. If Marcellus is iron and Nefert is spirit, Potinus is oil. He is a small, soft man, draped in excessive layers of Tyrian purple silk that rustles with every calculated movement. His fingers are encrusted with more jewels than a royal scepter, and he reeks of expensive, cloying myrrh that masks the scent of his own sweat. Potinus has a face like a crumpled papyrus, eyes darting and small, always looking for a weakness to exploit. He is a master of the coin, the one who manages the vast wealth of Egypt, the granaries, the gold mines of Kush, the trade routes to India. While I view our wealth as a means to feed and protect my people, Potinus views it as a scorecard for his own ambition. "My queen," Pothinus called out, his voice thin and high, echoing against the painted pillars of the hall. "The merchants are demanding compensation for the withered crops. They say if the queen cannot command the sun, perhaps the queen should not command the gold." I felt a flare of white-hot anger, but I pushed it down, replacing it with the calm, regal mask I have worn since I was a girl. I walked toward him, the hem of my royal robes, woven from silk and gold wire, hissing against the mosaic floor which depicted the Nile's bounty. "The gold of Egypt belongs to the people of Egypt, Pothinus," I said, my voice echoing with a strength that made him blink. "And as long as I draw breath, it will be used to sustain them, not to line the pockets of cowards who fear a bit of fog." The next morning, I called a private meeting in the golden throne room. The sun outside was a pale, sickly smudge in a gray sky. I sat upon my cedar throne, overlaid with thick sheets of hammered gold, holding the flail and the crook, the ancient symbols of my divine power. My fingers gripped the cold gold, seeking in it the solidity that the world seemed to be losing. Before me stood the three I watched most closely: Marcellus, Nefert, and Pothinus. Marcellus was restless. His hand rested on the hilt of his gladius, and he wore a tunic of deep scarlet linen beneath his leather armor, which was reinforced with bronze studs that caught the dim light. He looked at me with a concern so profound it almost made me drop my regal guard. Nefert, on the other hand, seemed to have aged decades in a single night. Her priestly robes, usually immaculate white, were creased, and the gold of her Isis pectoral looked dull, as if the goddess herself had turned away. And then there was Pothinus. He was strangely calm. His fat fingers toyed with a heavy gold chain around his neck, his oily face glistening under the lamplight. "The amulet must be found before the last ray of light vanishes," I said, my voice projecting a strength that my heart hesitated to feel. "The royal treasury has been opened to fund searches in every corner of the city. I offer 1,000 talents of gold to whoever brings me the head of the thief and the jewel of Ra." Pothinus bowed his head, a calculating smile distorting his thin lips. "My queen, the people already whisper that gold cannot buy what the gods have withdrawn. Perhaps the thief does not want money, but rather the end of a dynasty they consider cursed." Those words were like poison. Marcellus stepped forward, the metal of his armor creaking. "Watch your tongue, eunuch. The queen is the incarnation of Isis. Doubt is treason." I intervened before blood could stain the purple carpet. "Enough. Pothinus, you are the keeper of the keys. Nefert, you know the magical seals. If the amulet does not appear by sunset, everyone with access to the sanctuary will be interrogated under the gaze of the executioners." I saw a flash of hesitation in Pothinus's eyes. It lasted only a second, but for a woman who learned to read men like papyrus scrolls, it was enough. I decided to act with the cunning of a serpent. I feigned a momentary faint, letting Marcellus catch me. The heat of his strong arms against my back was a sweet reminder of the humanity I still possessed. "Take me to my chambers. I need rest." Once the sandalwood doors closed behind me and Marcellus, I pulled away from his embrace. "He has it, Marcellus. Pothinus is hiding something in the vaults where the grain wealth is stored." "I will kill him this instant," Marcellus growled, but I held his hand, my fingers intertwining with his. "No, we need the amulet intact. If he feels cornered, he might destroy it. We will use his love for gold against him." That night, under a cloak of dark silk, I descended into the depths of the palace with Marcellus. The air in the lower levels was damp, and smelled of moldy grain and cheap incense. We passed through rooms filled with chests of silver coins and gold bullion that shimmered faintly in the gloom. Finally, we reached a hidden chamber behind a tapestry depicting my father's victory. There, we found Pothinus. He was not alone. Before him, shrouded in black rags that seemed to absorb what little light we had, stood a skeletal figure, a shadow priest, a follower of the forbidden cult of Apophis. The amulet of the solar eye sat upon an altar of black stone, but something was wrong. The central stone, which should have pulsed with the fire of Ra, was gray and lifeless. "Where is the power?" Pothinus shouted at the priest. "You promised that if I delivered the amulet, I would have dominion over the trade routes. The gold is turning to lead in my hands." The priest laughed, a sound as dry as the desert wind. "The power of Ra does not belong to servants. It belongs to the blood. And the blood you betrayed is the only thing that can awaken it." In that moment we struck. Marcellus leapt from the darkness like a lion, his Roman steel flashing. He cut down 2 mercenary guards before they could even scream. I stepped forward not with a sword, but with the authority of one born to rule. "Pothinus," my voice whipped through the air, "your greed has condemned Egypt." The eunuch fell to his knees, begging for mercy, as Marcellus subdued the shadow priest. I picked up the amulet with trembling hands. It was cold, a hollow shell of what it once was. Pothinus, in his desperation, confessed everything. He had stolen the jewel to sell it to the cult in exchange for promises of eternal wealth and protection against the growing darkness. He believed that if the sun died, he would be the master of the only light left. What a fool! Gold is worthless in a world without life. I had solved the lesser problem. The traitor was at my feet, and the amulet was back in my possession. But the victory was bitter. Nefert appeared, emerging from the shadows with an expression of pure terror. She examined the jewel in my hands and let out a sigh that seemed to tear her soul. "The amulet is dead, Cleopatra," she said, her voice failing. "The shadow priest drained the solar essence to feed the darkness. To awaken it again, a ritual is not enough. We need a sacrifice of pure light, or the darkness will become permanent in 3 days." And it was then that the secondary challenge emerged, more terrible than the first. The shadow priest, before being hauled away in Marcellus's chains, looked at me with eyes that were nothing but black pits. "The queen wants light? Then she must seek it where light has never existed. The acolytes of the night are already in the tunnels beneath Alexandria. They are rising. They do not want your gold, queen. They want your throne of bones." Alexandria was now under internal attack. While I tried to figure out how to recharge the amulet to face the macro darkness, a legion of shadow fanatics began to emerge from the sewers and catacombs, assassinating my guards and spreading panic. I held the cold amulet against my chest, feeling the heavy weight of the gold crown upon my head. I was the queen. I was intelligent. I was strong. But as I looked into Marcellus's blue eyes, as he swore to protect me until death, I felt tragically human. I had the amulet, but it was useless, and the enemy was now within my walls, silent and relentless as death itself. The screams of my people reached me even through the thick, granite-lined walls of the palace, a sound more piercing than any chopesh, more chilling than the deepest winter of the north. Alexandria, my jewel, my city of light and learning, was bleeding. The acolytes of the night had emerged like a plague of locusts from the subterranean depths, their bodies painted with the soot of burned shrines, their eyes vacant and possessed by a void that hungered for the very soul of Egypt. I stood in the center of the great hall, my golden breastplate, carved in the image of the vulture goddess Nekbet, shimmering under the frantic, dying light of 100 oil lamps. I held the amulet of the solar eye in my palm. It remained a cold gray stone, a heavy mockery of the power it once held. Around me, my palace, a monument to the wealth of the Ptolemies, where every pillar was capped in gold and every floor was a mosaic of semi-precious stones, was becoming a tomb. "They are not just killing Cleopatra," said Marcellus, stepping toward me. His face was a mask of soot and Roman blood, his crimson cloak torn and dusty, yet he moved with the unyielding strength of a titan. He looked like a god of war descended into the pits of Duat. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as I wiped a smudge of blood from his cheek. The contact was brief, a spark of human warmth in a world turning to ice. "Then we must stop the source, Marcellus. I am a queen of gold and logic, but I know when a battle has moved beyond the reach of steel." We fought our way toward the great temple of Ra. The journey was a descent into a waking nightmare. The Golden Way, usually a bustling artery of trade where silk from the east and spice from the south changed hands for heaps of coin, was now a corridor of shadows. I saw wealth scattered in the gutters, chests of gold drachmas overturned, fine emerald necklaces trammeled in the mud, but no one stopped to pick them up. Gold has no value when the sun itself is being extinguished. My heart broke for the families I saw huddling in the doorways of their limestone houses, and a surge of protective, motherly fury rose within me. These were my children, and I would not let them be swallowed by the dark. Inside the great temple, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and rotting lilies. Nefert stood before the massive, gold-plated altar of Ra, her hands raised in desperate supplication. The sacred geometry of the temple, designed to channel the sun's rays into a single point of power, was useless in this unnatural gloom. "The ritual is failing, my queen," cried Nefert, her voice echoing off the towering columns that depicted the pharaoh's journey to the stars. "The amulet will not take the charge, my queen. There is no spark left in the world to ignite it. I have offered the temple's entire treasury, mountains of frankincense, rivers of sacred wine, the very gold from the statues, but the gods are silent." I stepped forward, the heels of my golden sandals clicking sharply on the lapis lazuli floors. "Perhaps the gods do not want our things, Nefert. Perhaps they want something more." For what felt like an eternity, we tried to solve the macro challenge through traditional means. We poured every ounce of our magical knowledge and material wealth into the ritual. I stood at the center of the sanctum, surrounded by a circle of priests chanting the ancient hymns of the Old Kingdom. We burned heaps of myrrh that cost more than a Roman province. I even took off my own crown, the heavy, triple gold circlet of the uraeus, and placed it on the altar as a sign of my ultimate humility. But the amulet remained a dead, cold weight. Outside, the secondary problem, the invasion, reached its breaking point. The bronze doors of the temple groaned under the pressure of the shadow horde. Marcellus and a handful of my most loyal guards stood as a final line of defense, their shields locked, their swords clashing against the intangible darkness. I watched as Marcellus was pushed back, his strength flagging, his blue eyes searching for me one last time in the gloom. Then the great bronze doors were not merely opened, they were disintegrated by a blast of pure, oily shadow.
Standing there was the Shadow High Priest, the one who had escaped our clutches in the vaults. He was no longer a man, he was a vessel for the void, his form flickering like a dying candle, his skin shimmering with a dark radiance that made my eyes ache. Behind him, the sky was pitch black, a hole in the universe where the sun should be. "The Queen of Gold is nothing but a woman of dust," the priest hissed, his voice vibrating from the very stones of the floor. "The sun is gone, Cleopatra. Your Rome cannot save you. Your intellect cannot save you. The age of the night has begun, and your throne will be the first to crumble." He raised a staff of obsidian, and a wave of cold energy swept through the hall, extinguishing every lamp, every torch, every ember. We were plunged into a darkness so absolute it felt like being buried alive in a tomb of ice. I heard Marcellus shout my name, the sound of his struggle growing distant, muffled by the encroaching void. In that moment of total silence and total dark, something shifted inside me. I stopped looking for the light outside. I stopped thinking about the gold on the walls or the crown on the altar. I realized that for all my life I had used my wealth and my mind as shields, but now there was nothing left but the essence of who I was. I closed my eyes and reached deep into the core of my being, into the fierce, protective love I felt for my people, the unshakable devotion I had for Egypt, and the quiet, steady flame of my own spirit. I realized that the living Isis was not a title given by priests to flatter a queen. It was a spark of the divine fire that lives in every soul, buried under the weight of ego and gold. "I am the light," I whispered to the darkness. I didn't need a sacrifice. I needed to be the sacrifice. I gripped the amulet, and instead of trying to draw power from it, I poured my own life force, my own love, and my own iron will into it. I felt a searing heat bloom in my chest, a golden fire that burned away my fear, my pride, and even the memory of my own name. The amulet didn't just glow, it became a star. A pillar of blinding, liquid gold light erupted from my hands, tearing through the roof of the temple and piercing the black sky like a spear of the primordial creator. The shadow priest let out a sound that was not human as the light touched him, his form evaporating into ash before he could even scream. The darkness that had choked the streets began to recede, chased away by a dawn that was rising not from the horizon, but from the heart of my city. The great turn was complete. I felt the power of Ra flowing through my veins like molten gold, a weightless solar energy that connected me to every grain of sand, every drop of the Nile, and every beating heart in my kingdom. I was no longer just a queen, I was a conduit for the sun itself. I stood in the center of the ruined temple, my royal robes scorched, my breath coming in ragged golden gasps. The amulet was no longer a stone, it was a pulsing, brilliant carnelian heart, radiating a warmth that filled the entire hall. The sun in the sky, once pale and dying, caught the reflection of the fire within me and flared back to life, its true warmth returning to the withered crops and the cold marble. I had saved the sun, but the woman who had started the ritual was gone. I looked at my hands, they were faintly translucent, glowing with a soft golden hue that did not fade. I had claimed a power none dared defy, but in doing so, I had stepped onto a path that led far beyond the thrones of men. Marcellus ran to me, his face filled with an expression I had never seen, a mixture of profound relief and terrifying awe. He stopped just short of touching me, as if afraid he might be consumed by the sun I now carried. "Cleopatra," he whispered, his voice trembling. I smiled, a tired but triumphant expression, and reached out to him. My touch was warm, warmer than a human's should ever be, but it was filled with the same love that fueled the fire. "I am still here, Marcellus," I said, my voice resonating with a new melodic power. "But the queen you knew has walked through the fire, and she has brought the light home."
The light did not just return, it claimed the world back from the brink of the abyss. As I stepped out from the shattered remains of the Temple of Ra, the true sun, the one that had warmed the sands of Egypt for millennia, broke through the final tatters of the shadow. It was a dawn like no other, painting the white marble of Alexandria in hues of rose and violet gold. I stood at the top of the temple stairs, the amulet of the solar eye still pulsing against my chest, a second heart made of divine fire.
I looked down at the city, my city. The people were emerging from their homes, their faces upturned to the sky, weeping with a joy that no amount of gold could ever buy. I felt their relief as if it were my own. I saw the merchants returning to their stalls, picking up the scattered coins and silks I had seen earlier. But there was a difference now. They looked at the wealth not with greed, but with a quiet understanding of its fragility. "My queen," Nefertiti said, stepping up beside me. She looked at my hands, which still shimmered with a faint ethereal luminescence, and she bowed lower than she ever had before. "The darkness is gone. The crops will grow. The Nile will rise. You have done what no pharaoh before you has achieved. You have shared the breath of Ra." "I did what a mother does for her children, Nefertiti," I replied, my voice sounding to my own ears like the chime of golden bells. "But the cost was high. The palace must be cleansed, and the people must be fed. We have much work to do." I returned to the palace not as a conqueror but as a restorer. My first act was one of the generosity I have always held dear. I ordered the royal granaries to be opened wide. I commanded that the gold Pothinus had tried to hoard, the mountains of minted coins and the heavy bars of bullion, be used immediately to rebuild the districts the acolytes had damaged. I sat in my council chamber, my mind sharper than ever, calculating the logistics of trade and the restoration of the temples. I was intelligent enough to know that a kingdom is not built on light alone, but on the stability of its bread and the strength of its currency. Pothinus was brought before me in chains of heavy, cold iron. He looked small, his purple silks stained with the filth of the vaults. He could not look at me, he could not. The light that now resided within me was too much for his treacherous eyes to bear. "You traded the soul of Egypt for a promise of coin," I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of the sun. "You thought gold was power. You were wrong. Power is the will to protect those who cannot protect themselves." I did not execute him. To do so would have been to let the darkness have one last victory. Instead, I stripped him of his titles and his wealth, sentencing him to work in the very grain fields he had sought to starve. It was a humble end for a man of such pride, and in that there was a poetic justice that only a queen could appreciate. Marcellus remained by my side through the weeks of rebuilding. Our love had changed, tempered by the fire of the ritual. We walked through the palace gardens at night, where the scent of blooming lotus and heavy jasmine filled the air. The Mediterranean breeze was cool, a welcome contrast to the heat that still lived under my skin. He took my hand one evening, his calloused thumb stroking the golden glow of my palm. "The Romans will hear of this, Cleopatra. They will say you are a sorceress. They will say you are dangerous." "Let them say what they wish," I told him, leaning my head against his shoulder. My love for him was the anchor that kept me tied to the earth, the one thing that reminded me I was still a woman of flesh and blood. I looked out over the harbor, where the Pharos lighthouse stood tall, its fire now mirrored by the unnatural brilliance of the amulet I still wore. The macro challenge of the dying sun had been solved, and the secondary threat of the acolytes had been crushed. But as I watched the dark waves of the great sea, I knew that the void had not been destroyed, only pushed back. The shadow priest had spoken of a throne of bones, and I could still feel the faint, cold echo of his laughter in the wind. My story does not end with the return of the light. It is merely the beginning of a new era. I, Cleopatra, have become something more than a queen. I am the guardian of the solar fire, the woman who stood against the dark and found a strength that none dared defy. My treasury is full, my mind is clear, and my heart is fierce. As the stars began to appear, true stars twinkling in a sky that was finally clear, I felt a sense of anticipation. The world is vast, and there are other shadows lurking in the corners of empires. But let them come, let the traitors whisper and the kings tremble, for as long as the sun rises over the Nile, and as long as I draw breath, the light of Egypt will never fail. I am Cleopatra, and the sun belongs to me.